The handcuffs clicked against Helena Morrison's wrists with a sound that seemed to echo through the funeral parlor. She stood perfectly still, her gray hair pulled back in its usual neat bun, watching as 200 mourners turned in their pews to stare. The whispers started immediately, spreading like wildfire through the crowd. "Helena Morrison," Detective Rodriguez's voice cut through the stunned silence. "You are under arrest for the murder of your son, Marcus Sterling." 3 days earlier, the same room had been filled with flowers and grief. Now it felt like a courtroom, with Helena as the accused. She kept her eyes forward, refusing to look at the mahogany casket where her son lay, refusing to acknowledge the gasps from the congregation. Victoria Sterling rose from the front pew, her black Armani dress perfectly pressed, her blonde hair styled in an elegant chignon. Even in grief, she looked like she'd stepped off the cover of a magazine. She pressed a tissue to her dry eyes and whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "I'm so sorry it had to come to this." Helena finally turned her head. For a moment, their eyes met across the aisle. Victoria's gaze was steady, almost challenging. Helena's was filled with something that looked like resignation. But underneath, there was a flicker of something else. Knowledge. Perhaps. Or warning. "Ma'am, we need to go now," Detective Rodriguez said gently. He was younger than Helena's own grandson, with kind eyes that seemed apologetic for the spectacle. As they led her down the aisle, Helena's mind drifted back to 3 nights ago. The Sterling family dinner had been like so many others over the past 5 years. She'd cooked Marcus's favorite pot roast, the way she'd made it when he was a boy. Victoria had complained about the seasoning. As usual, the children, Lily and Noah, had chattered about school, their voices bright against the tension that always seemed to hover over the dining room table. Marcus had looked tired that night, more tired than usual. His hand had shaken slightly as he reached for his heart medication, the little white pills that kept his damaged heart beating. Helena had noticed everything about her son in those final months, the way his skin had grown pale, the way he'd started losing weight, the way he'd begun looking at his wife when he thought no one was watching. "I found the evidence myself," Victoria was telling a reporter who'd somehow slipped into the funeral parlor. "The poison was in his heart medication. She had access to everything. She prepared his meals, organized his pills, took care of him completely." Helena stumbled slightly, and Detective Rodriguez steadied her arm. "Careful now," he murmured. The evidence. Helena knew exactly what Victoria was referring to. The small bottle she'd discovered in Helena's bathroom drawer just hours after Marcus died. The bottle with traces of digitalis, far more concentrated than what any heart medication should contain. The bottle with Helena's fingerprints all over it. But what Victoria didn't mention, what she couldn't know, was that Helena had found that bottle herself only an hour before the police arrived, hidden behind her cold cream and reading glasses, placed there by someone who knew exactly where she kept her personal items. As they reached the funeral parlor's heavy oak doors, Helena heard 9-year-old Lily's voice call out, "Grandma Nana, where are they taking you?" Helena turned one last time. Lily was standing on her pew, her small face confused and frightened. 11-year-old Noah had his arm around his sister, but his dark eyes, so much like his father's, were fixed on Helena with an expression far too mature for his age. "Take care of each other," Helena called back to them, her voice steady despite everything. "Remember what Grandpa Marcus taught you about being brave." Victoria quickly pulled the children down, whispering something in their ears that made Lily start crying. Outside, the October air was crisp and sharp. Helena breathed it in deeply, wondering if it might be one of the last times she'd smell autumn leaves and wood smoke as a free woman. The police car waited at the curb, its lights flashing red and blue against the funeral parlor's brick facade. "Mrs. Morrison," Detective Rodriguez said as he helped her into the back seat, "you have the right to remain silent." But Helena wasn't listening to the Miranda rights. She was thinking about Marcus, about the conversation they'd had just 2 weeks before he died, about the fear in his eyes when he'd asked her, in a whisper, "Mom, do you think someone who loves you could ever want to hurt you?" She'd told him that love and hurt sometimes lived in the same heart. She'd had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. Victoria Sterling had always been perfect at everything. Perfect grades at Harvard Law. Perfect job at the city's most prestigious firm. Perfect marriage to Marcus Sterling. Heir to a real estate fortune. Perfect mother to 2 beautiful children. And now, she was playing the perfect grieving widow with an Oscar-worthy performance. She stood in the police station's fluorescent-lit conference room, her manicured hands folded carefully on the metal table. Across from her, Detective Rodriguez and his partner, Detective Sarah Kim, watched as Victoria presented her case with the precision of a seasoned prosecutor. "I found this 3 days ago," Victoria said, sliding a small evidence bag across the table. Inside was a brown prescription bottle, the label clearly marked with Marcus's name and his heart medication. The pharmacy confirmed that the concentration of digitalis in these pills was nearly 10 times what it should have been. Detective Kim leaned forward. "And you believe your mother-in-law tampered with these?" Helena had complete access to Marcus's medication. She organized his pill dispenser every Sunday morning. She claimed it was to help him remember to take them. Victoria's voice caught slightly. A perfect tremor of grief and betrayal. "I trusted her completely. We all did." She opened her leather portfolio and withdrew a small notebook bound in faded blue cloth. "I found this in her room when I was looking for something to wear, to identify the body. It's her diary." Detective Rodriguez took the notebook and flipped through the pages. Helena's handwriting was neat and precise, the observations of a woman who'd spent decades as a nurse, trained to notice details. Most entries were mundane: notes about the children's activities, reminders about grocery shopping, comments about the weather, but scattered throughout were darker observations. "Marcus looked at me strangely today, as if he suspects something. Victoria doesn't deserve the life she has. Some people take up space in this world that others could fill better." And then, in an entry dated just 1 week before Marcus died, "Marcus doesn't deserve to live the life he's been given, not when others have sacrificed so much." "Mrs. Sterling," Detective Kim said carefully, "these entries are concerning, but they're also somewhat vague. Did your mother-in-law ever express any direct animosity toward your husband?" Victoria's perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment. When she spoke, her voice was harder, more calculating. "You have to understand, Detective, Helena gave up her own life to move in with us 5 years ago. She sold her little apartment, gave up her independence, all to help with the children when I went back to work. But I think she began to resent Marcus for the life he had. The money, the comfort, the family." She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Marcus was a good son. He took care of her, made sure she had everything she needed. But Helena is from a different generation. She worked as a nurse for 40 years, scraped and saved for everything. I think seeing Marcus's success, seeing how easily things came to him, it ate away at her." "And the inheritance?" Detective Rodriguez asked, consulting his notes. "I understand there's a substantial estate." Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Marcus left everything to me and the children. Of course, Helena will be provided for, but she's not a primary beneficiary. I can't help wondering if she thought..." If she believed that, with Marcus gone, she might have more control over the family finances. What Victoria didn't mention was the conversation she'd overheard between Marcus and his lawyer just 2 months before his death. She'd been returning from yoga class when she'd seen David Chen's car in their driveway. The study door had been slightly ajar, and she'd heard Marcus say, "I want to make sure my mother is completely protected. David, if anything happens to me, if there are any unusual circumstances, I want her to inherit everything." She'd stood frozen in the hallway, listening as Marcus explained his growing suspicions about his wife's behavior, the late-night phone calls, the sudden interest in his life insurance policies, the way she'd been pushing him to increase his coverage, claiming it was for the children's future. But now, sitting in this stark police conference room, Victoria was rewriting that narrative. She was transforming herself from suspect to victim, from potential murderer to grieving widow who'd discovered a terrible truth about her trusted mother-in-law. "I keep thinking I should have seen the signs," she said, her voice breaking convincingly. Helena was so devoted to Marcus, so protective, maybe too protective. Maybe she thought she was the only one who truly understood what was best for him. The detectives exchanged glances. They'd seen family murder cases before, and they knew that the most dangerous killers often wore the masks of caregivers and protectors. Detective James Wright had been staring at the case file for 20 minutes without reading a single word. The name Helena Morrison seemed to burn itself into his retinas every time he tried to focus on the evidence reports and witness statements scattered across his desk. 50 years. It had been 50 years since he'd seen Helena Caldwell, as she'd been known then. 50 years since she'd broken his heart by choosing nursing school over their wedding plans. 50 years since he'd watched her disappear into a life he couldn't follow, pursuing a calling that seemed more important to her than their love. He'd become a cop instead of the teacher he'd planned to be. Married Sarah, a sweet girl from his neighborhood who'd never challenged him the way Helena had. Raised 3 children who were now scattered across the country with families of their own. Built a decent life, a respectable career, a comfortable retirement plan. But he'd never forgotten the girl with the serious gray eyes who'd wanted to save the world one patient at a time. "Right. You okay?" Detective Kim appeared beside his desk, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that." James accepted the coffee gratefully. "This Morrison case. I need to recuse myself." "Why?" "You know the suspect." James stared at Helena's booking photo. Even at 72, even with her hair completely gray and lines mapping decades of experience across her face, she was unmistakably the girl he'd once planned to marry. "I knew her a long time ago. Before she was married. Before she became a nurse." "How well did you know her?" The question hung in the air between them. How could he explain that Helena Caldwell had been the center of his universe for 3 years, that he'd loved her with the desperate intensity of a young man who believed love could conquer anything, that losing her had shaped every relationship he'd had since— well enough that I can't be objective about her guilt or innocence. Detective Kim studied his face. "What's your gut telling you? That's the problem. I don't know if I can trust my gut on this one." 2 hours later, James found himself in the county jail's visiting room, staring across a metal table at the woman who'd haunted his dreams for 5 decades. Helena sat perfectly straight, her hands folded in her lap, wearing the orange jumpsuit that made everyone look guilty regardless of their actual crimes. "Hello, James." Her voice was exactly as he remembered it, calm, steady, with just the slightest hint of warmth underneath the professional composure. "Helena?" He cleared his throat. "I wasn't sure you'd agree to see me." "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." She studied his face, taking in the gray hair, the lines around his eyes, the weight of decades lived without her. You became a detective. I always thought you'd be a teacher. Life took some unexpected turns. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of all their unspoken history filling the space between them. Finally, James leaned forward. Helena, I need you to know that I've recused myself from your case officially. But I also need to ask you, as someone who once cared about you very much, did you kill your son? Helena's composure cracked, just slightly. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. James, there are things about my life, about the choices I've made, that you couldn't understand, things I've done that I'm not proud of. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you. She stood up, smoothing down the orange fabric. I deserve whatever happens to me. I've deserved it for a long time. Helena, wait. But she was already walking away, her shoulders straight and her head held high, leaving James with more questions than answers and the terrible certainty that the woman he'd once loved was hiding secrets that could destroy them both. Detective Sarah Kim had interviewed hundreds of witnesses in her 15-year career, but she'd never had to question two children about their father's death while their mother sat in the next room, insisting on monitoring every word. Lily Sterling, 9 years old with her father's dark eyes and her mother's golden hair, swung her legs nervously from the oversized chair in the family services office. Her 11-year-old brother Noah sat beside her, his jaw set in a way that reminded Kim of adult suspects trying to protect themselves. Can you tell me about the night your daddy died? Kim asked gently, sliding a box of tissues across the coffee table. Lily looked at Noah, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Mommy and Daddy were fighting, she said in a small voice. They thought we were asleep, but they were really loud. Kim glanced through the one-way mirror where Victoria Sterling sat rigid in her chair, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear. Victoria had insisted she had not been home the night Marcus died, claiming she'd been at her book club until nearly midnight. What were they fighting about? Sweetheart, money, Noah said flatly. His voice carried a weariness that belonged on someone much older. They always fought about money. Daddy said Mommy was spending too much. Mommy said Daddy was being selfish. Can you remember anything specific they said that night? Lily's eyes filled with tears. Daddy said. He said Mommy was trying to hurt him, and Mommy said she was tired of pretending to be happy. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. Then we heard something break, like glass. Kim made a note. According to Victoria's statement, there had been no argument that night. She claimed Marcus had simply felt unwell after dinner and had gone to bed early. She'd found him unconscious the next morning when she'd returned from her book club. Was your grandmother there that night? Kim asked. Grandma Nana was in the kitchen, Noah said. She was cleaning up after dinner. She always cleaned up, even when Mommy said the housekeeper would do it in the morning. Did you see her after your parents started fighting? The children exchanged another look. She came upstairs, Lily whispered. She was crying. She sat on my bed and told me and Noah that sometimes grown-ups say things they don't mean when they're scared. Scared of what? She said Daddy was scared someone was trying to make him sick on purpose. Noah said. His voice dropped even lower. She said we might have to be very brave soon. Kim felt her pulse quicken. This contradicted everything Victoria had told them about Helena's supposed resentment and jealousy. Did your grandmother seem angry at your father? No. Lily's response was immediate and fierce. Grandma Nana loved Daddy so much. She took care of him when he got sick. She made him special soup and sat with him when he couldn't sleep. She was sad, though, Noah added thoughtfully. Really sad, like she knew something bad was going to happen, and she couldn't stop it. Kim leaned forward slightly. Can you think of anything else from that night? Anything at all that seemed strange or different? The children were quiet for a long moment. Then Lily raised her hand tentatively, as if she were in school. "Detective Lady, I saw Mommy doing something weird after Daddy went to sleep." "What kind of weird thing?" "She went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. But she didn't take any food out. She put something in the back, behind the milk cartons." Lily's brow furrowed in concentration. "It was a little bag, like the ones Grandma Nana uses for her garden seeds." Kim's heart rate spiked again. "A small bag. What color?" "White. And it had something written on it in black marker, but I couldn't read it from where I was hiding on the stairs." "Did you tell anyone about this?" Lily shook her head quickly. "Mommy doesn't like it when we spy on grown-ups. She says it's rude and we could get in big trouble." Kim glanced at Noah, who had gone very still. "Noah, did you see this too?" The boy nodded slowly. "But there's something else." He looked down at his hands. "The next morning, after we found Daddy and the ambulance came, I went to get some juice from the fridge. The bag was gone." Kim felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting in her mind. Victoria had claimed she'd been at book club until midnight, but the children clearly remembered her being home, arguing with Marcus, and then disposing of something in the refrigerator. More importantly, Helena hadn't seemed like a bitter, resentful woman plotting murder. She'd seemed like a grandmother trying to comfort frightened children while their parents' marriage fell apart around them. "One more question," Kim said gently. "In the days before your daddy died, did you notice if he was acting differently? Scared, maybe, or worried about something?" "He stopped eating Mommy's cooking," Lily said immediately. "He would only eat things Grandma Nana made, or food that came in packages he could open himself. And he started locking his bedroom door at night," Noah added. "He never used to do that. When I had nightmares, I could always just walk in. But the last few weeks, the door was always locked." Kim closed her notebook, her mind racing. Marcus Sterling hadn't been the victim of a mother's resentment. He'd been a man who suspected his wife was trying to kill him, a man who'd been taking precautions to protect himself, a man whose precautions hadn't been enough. As she prepared to leave, Lily tugged on her sleeve. "Detective Lady, is Grandma Nana going to come home soon? Mommy says she did something really bad, but I don't believe her. Grandma Nana wouldn't hurt anybody." Kim knelt down to the little girl's level. "We're going to figure out exactly what happened, okay? And we're going to make sure the truth comes out." But as she looked into Lily's trusting eyes, Kim realized the truth might be far more complicated than anyone had imagined. Dr. Sarah Chen had been the Sterling family physician for over a decade, but she'd never had to betray patient confidentiality to prevent a murder conviction. She sat in Detective Kim's office at 8 a.m. on a gray Thursday morning, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched a manila folder that could change everything about Helena Morrison's case. "Doctor, you said this was about Marcus Sterling's medical records." Detective Kim poured 2 cups of coffee, noting the obvious distress on the usually composed physician's face. "It's about what Marcus told me in the weeks before he died." Dr. Chen opened the folder with deliberate care. "I've been struggling with this since his death, trying to balance my oath of patient confidentiality with my obligation to prevent an innocent woman from being convicted of murder." She pulled out a series of lab reports, each one marked with dates spanning the 6 months before Marcus's death. "Marcus came to see me privately in March, about 7 months before he died. He said he'd been feeling increasingly unwell, but not in ways that matched his known heart condition." Detective Kim leaned forward. "What kind of symptoms? Nausea, fatigue, occasional tremors in his hands?" He initially attributed it to stress from work, but then he began to suspect something else. Dr. Chen's voice dropped. "He asked me to run blood panels without billing his insurance, and he paid cash for everything. He said he didn't want his wife to know about the tests." "Why not?" "Because he suspected she was poisoning him." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Detective Kim felt her pulse quicken as she studied the lab reports. "What did the tests show?" The first panel in March showed slightly elevated levels of digitalis in his system, but nothing immediately dangerous. We discussed it, and Marcus said he'd been very careful about taking only the prescribed amount of his heart medication. Dr. Chen flipped to another report. The second panel in May showed even higher levels. High enough to be dangerous, high enough to be deliberate. Dr. Ma, Chen pulled out a handwritten note. Marcus gave me this during his final visit in September, just 3 weeks before he died. He made me promise to open it only if something happened to him. Detective Kim read Marcus's neat handwriting aloud. If I die unexpectedly, the person responsible is not my mother. Helena would never hurt me. Look closer at Victoria. She's been asking about life insurance, about my will, about what would happen if I died. She doesn't know that I know about her debts, about the money she's been stealing from the business accounts, about the man she's been seeing when I'm at work. My mother is innocent. Please protect her. Please protect my children. Jesus, Kim whispered. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Dr. Chen's composure finally cracked. Because I hoped I was wrong. Because Marcus was my patient and my friend, and I couldn't believe anyone would. She took a shaky breath. And because Helena Morrison was also my patient, and I knew about her history. What history? 30 years ago, when she was still working as a nurse, there were allegations. 3 patients under her care died unexpectedly. The investigation concluded they were mercy killings, patients who were terminal, suffering greatly, and Helena. She helped them find peace. Detective Kim felt the case shifting again beneath her feet. Was she charged? No, the families didn't press charges. They were grateful. Actually, their loved ones had been in agony, and Helena had shown them compassion when the system failed them. Dr. Chen closed the folder, but it destroyed her career. She left nursing, married a good man, tried to build a quiet life. I think she's carried the guilt of those deaths for 3 decades. You think that's why she won't fight the charges now? I think Helena Morrison believes she deserves to be punished, even if it's for something she didn't do. Doctor? Chen stood up, looking older than she had when she'd arrived. Detective, Marcus was my patient, but Helena is my friend. She didn't kill her son, but she may let herself be convicted because she thinks it's penance for the patients she helped die 30 years ago. Detective Kim stared at the lab report spread across her desk. Marcus Sterling had been slowly poisoned over a period of months, but not by his devoted mother. He'd been killed by his wife, a woman who'd been systematically draining their accounts and planning her widowhood while maintaining the perfect facade of a loving spouse. And Helena Morrison, a woman who'd spent 3 decades carrying the weight of 3 mercy killings, was so consumed by her own guilt that she was willing to be convicted for a murder she didn't commit. Dr. Chen, Kim said quietly, I need you to prepare a formal statement. Everything Marcus told you, all the test results, all of it. Because we're about to turn this case completely upside down. Robert Sterling had built his real estate empire by reading people correctly and striking when they least expected it. At 70, he'd survived 3 recessions, 2 divorces, and countless business rivals who'd underestimated the quiet man with the calculating eyes. But sitting across from Detective Kim in his corner office overlooking the city, he looked every one of his 70 years. I should have spoken up sooner, he said, opening a wall safe hidden behind a painting of his late wife. But I promised Marcus I'd wait until after the funeral. He said he didn't want Victoria to know about the changes to his will until it was too late for her to do anything about it. He withdrew a thick legal document and placed it on his mahogany desk. My son contacted his attorney in August, about 6 weeks before he died. He was terrified. Detective Kim, absolutely terrified of his own wife. Detective Kim studied the will carefully. The language was complex, but the intent was clear. If Marcus Sterling died under any circumstances deemed suspicious or unnatural, his entire estate would bypass his wife completely and transfer to Helena Morrison in trust for the children. "This includes everything?" Kim asked. "The house, the business interests, the life insurance. Everything?" "Approximately $52 million in total assets, plus the company's stock options, which could add another $30 million over the next 5 years. Robert's voice was grim. Marcus had discovered that Victoria had been embezzling from the company accounts. Small amounts at first, but it escalated over the past year. She'd taken nearly $200,000. Did he confront her about it? He was planning to, but then he started getting sick. The more unwell he became, the more suspicious he grew about the timing. Robert pulled out another folder. He hired a private investigator in September. Kim opened the folder to find photographs that made her stomach turn. Victoria Sterling leaving an expensive hotel with a man who was definitely not her husband. Victoria at a high-end jewelry store, purchasing items that hadn't appeared on any of her insurance documentation. Victoria meeting with a divorce attorney, taking notes in a small leather journal. She was planning to leave him, Kim said. "Planning to leave him after he died," Robert corrected. The investigator documented several conversations Victoria had with her sister in California. She was making arrangements to relocate there with the children after a reasonable period of mourning. She'd already been looking at houses, enrolling the children in private schools. Kim felt the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. So, when Helena Morrison gets arrested for Marcus's murder, Victoria inherits everything cleanly, no suspicious circumstances clause, no investigation into her own behavior. Exactly. And Helena, bless her heart, is so consumed by her own guilt over things that happened decades ago that she's not fighting the charges. Robert's eyes hardened. That woman is letting my daughter-in-law frame her for my son's murder. Mr. Sterling, why didn't Marcus just divorce Victoria if he suspected she was stealing and cheating? Robert was quiet for a long moment. Because he was afraid she'd get custody of the children. Victoria's a successful attorney with no criminal record and seemingly stable finances, thanks to the money she'd stolen. Marcus was concerned that his heart condition would be used against him in a custody battle. He thought she'd argue he was too ill to care for the children properly. So he changed his will instead. He protected the people who mattered most to him. His mother, who'd sacrificed everything to help his family. His children, who would be raised by someone who actually loved them unconditionally. Robert closed the folders with finality, and he ensured that Victoria would get exactly what she deserved for betraying his trust. Detective Kim stood up, her mind already racing through the implications. "Mr. Sterling, I need copies of everything. The will, the private investigator's report, the embezzlement evidence, all of it." "Detective," Robert said as she prepared to leave, "there's one more thing you should know. Victoria doesn't realize it yet, but even if Helena is convicted, the will still stands. The suspicious circumstances clause is triggered by the arrest itself, not the conviction. Victoria Sterling just destroyed her own inheritance to frame an innocent woman." Kim paused at the door. "She doesn't know." Robert Sterling smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. Marcus was smarter than his wife ever gave him credit for, and Victoria Sterling is about to discover that greed makes people do incredibly stupid things. The county jail's visiting room felt smaller at 11 o'clock at night, when the fluorescent lights hummed louder and the silence pressed against the walls like something alive. James Wright sat across from Helena Morrison, no longer officially assigned to her case, but unable to stay away from the woman who'd haunted his dreams for 50 years. Helena's orange jumpsuit seemed to have faded her, making her look older and more fragile than the composed woman he'd seen just days before. But her eyes were the same serious, thoughtful, carrying depths of experience that both attracted and frightened him. "You shouldn't be here. James," she said quietly. Your career, your reputation. To hell with my career. His voice was rougher than he'd intended. Helena, Detective Kim showed me Dr. Chen's statement, the medical evidence, the lab reports. You didn't kill Marcus. Helena's hands, folded carefully on the metal table, began to tremble slightly. There are things you don't understand about me, James. Things I've never told anyone. Then tell me now. For a long moment, she was silent. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Do you remember why I chose nursing school over marrying you? You said you wanted to help people, to make a difference. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Helena's eyes fixed on something beyond his shoulder, as if she were looking back through decades of carefully buried memories. I became a nurse because I thought I could save people. I thought I could ease suffering and bring healing wherever I went. James waited, sensing that interrupting would shatter whatever fragile resolve was allowing her to speak. For most of my career, I did exactly that. I was good at my job. James, I helped thousands of patients recover, supported countless families through difficult times. I found purpose in service, just like I'd always dreamed. Her voice grew smaller. But there were 3 patients, near the end of my career, who couldn't be saved. The words hung between them like a confession, waiting to be born. Margaret Hutchins was 68 years old, dying of pancreatic cancer. The pain medication wasn't working anymore. She begged me, every single day, to help her find peace. Her family was suffering, watching her suffer. Helena's hands were shaking more visibly now. I increased her morphine drip one night. Just enough. She died peacefully in her sleep. James felt his chest tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. Thomas Chen, Dr. Chen's father, actually was the second. Lung cancer. Couldn't breathe without machines. Begging me to let him go home to his wife. The doctor said he had weeks of agony ahead of him. Her voice cracked slightly. I helped him find his way home to her. And the third, a little girl, 8 years old, brain tumor. She'd been suffering for months. And her parents... Helena closed her eyes. Her parents asked me to help their baby stop hurting. So I did. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of 30-year-old secrets. There was an investigation, Helena continued. The hospital administration, the state nursing board, everyone asking questions. But the families protected me. They said I'd shown mercy when the system failed their loved ones. They called me an angel. But you didn't feel like an angel. I felt like a murderer. The words came out raw and broken. 3 times, James. 3 times I decided that I knew better than God or nature or whatever force decides when a life should end. I played judge and jury with human souls. James leaned forward. Helena, you were showing compassion. I was playing God. Her voice rose, then immediately dropped back to a whisper as she remembered where they were. And for 30 years, I've carried the weight of those decisions. Every night, I see their faces. Margaret, thanking me with her eyes as she slipped away. Thomas, squeezing my hand as the pain finally stopped. That little girl. She broke off, unable to continue. Is that why you won't fight these charges, because you think you deserve to be punished? Helena looked directly at him for the first time since she'd started talking. I think the universe has a way of balancing things out. James, I took 3 lives. Even if I told myself I was being merciful, maybe it's time I paid for that. By going to prison for something you didn't do. By accepting responsibility for the kind of person I became. She stood up slowly, as if the weight of her confessions had made her bones heavier. I've spent 30 years trying to atone for those deaths by living quietly, by serving others, by never again putting myself in a position where I had to choose between mercy and morality. Helena, listen to me. No, James, you listen to me. Her voice carried a strength he hadn't heard before. I loved Marcus more than my own life. I would have died for him gladly. But I also know what I'm capable of when someone I love is suffering beyond hope. Victoria Sterling may have murdered her husband, but I have murder in my heart too. The only difference is that I've already acted on it. She moved toward the door, where the guard was waiting, then paused. 3 times, James, 3 times I decided when life should end. Maybe this is God's way of making sure I never make that decision again. As the door closed behind her, James sat alone in the visiting room, finally understanding why the woman he'd loved had always seemed to carry shadows with her. Helena Morrison wasn't just refusing to fight the charges because she felt guilty. She was refusing to fight because she believed, in the deepest part of her soul, that she deserved whatever punishment the world wanted to give her, even if it was for a crime she hadn't committed. Victoria Sterling stood in her kitchen at 2 a.m., frantically pulling items from the back of her sub-zero refrigerator. Behind the organic milk and artisanal yogurts, her fingers found what she was looking for, a small Ziploc bag containing white powder that would destroy her life if anyone discovered it. She'd been careful for months, purchasing the digitalis online using untraceable accounts, grinding the pills into powder in her garage workshop, adding tiny amounts to Marcus's food and medication. But Dr. Chen's visit to the police station that afternoon had changed everything. If they started looking closer at the medical evidence, if they realized Marcus had been slowly poisoned over months rather than killed in a single incident. Her hands shook as she opened the bag. There was enough concentrated digitalis here to kill 3 people Marcus's size, more than enough to prove premeditation if it was ever found. The garbage disposal roared to life as she poured the powder down the drain, following it with bleach and dish soap to eliminate any traces. But as she reached for the empty bag, headlights swept across her kitchen window. 3 cars. Police cars. Victoria's mind raced as she heard car doors slamming in her driveway. The search warrant, they must have gotten a search warrant. But for what? What had they found? The doorbell rang, followed immediately by heavy knocking. Police search warrant. Victoria smoothed her silk pajamas and walked calmly to the front door. Every inch the cooperative widow who had nothing to hide. Detective Kim stood on her porch with a warrant and a team of crime scene technicians. Mrs. Sterling, we have a warrant to search your home and property for evidence related to your husband's death. Of course, Detective. I want to help in any way I can. Victoria's voice was steady, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. May I ask what specifically you're looking for? Evidence of digitalis, in any form. We're also looking for financial documents, electronic devices, and correspondence. Detective Kim stepped into the foyer. I need to ask you to wait in the living room while we conduct our search. Victoria sat on her white leather sofa, watching technicians swarm through her perfectly decorated home. They photographed everything, bagged items she couldn't identify, turned her orderly life into chaos. But she forced herself to remain calm. She'd destroyed the digitalis. Her laptop had been wiped clean weeks ago. The burner phone she'd used for her affair was at the bottom of Miller's Pond. Detective Kim. One of the technicians emerged from the kitchen, holding something in an evidence bag. We found traces of digitalis in the garbage disposal. Looks like someone tried to wash it down recently. But there are still residues on the blades. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. That's impossible. I don't even know what digitalis looks like. We also found these. Another technician held up a box of latex gloves from under the kitchen sink. They're a specific medical grade, not the kind most people keep at home. Those are for cleaning. Victoria said quickly. "I have sensitive skin." Detective Kim studied Victoria's face carefully. "Mrs. Sterling, we've also received some interesting information about your whereabouts on the night your husband died. We have statements indicating you were home, not at book club as you claimed." "That's ridiculous. You can check with my book club members." "We did? They said you canceled that evening, claiming you had a family emergency." Victoria's carefully constructed facade began to crack. I must have been confused. The grief, the trauma of finding Marcus like that." "Mrs. Sterling, we also have evidence of substantial embezzlement from your husband's business accounts. Nearly $200,000 transferred to accounts in your name over the past 18 months. The room seemed to tilt around Victoria. They knew everything. Somehow, they'd pieced together months of careful planning and discovered every secret she'd thought was safely buried. "Detective," she said, her voice growing sharp with desperation, "you're focusing on the wrong person. Helena Morrison had access to everything. She prepared Marcus's meals, organized his medication, had every opportunity. Helena Morrison loved your husband like her own child." Detective Kim interrupted. "The person who killed Marcus Sterling was someone who stood to gain from his death, someone who'd been stealing from him for months, someone who'd been planning a new life without him." Victoria's lawyer would later say she should have remained silent, should have demanded legal representation before saying another word. But in that moment, with her perfect life crumbling around her and the weight of her guilt finally crushing her carefully maintained composure, Victoria Sterling made the mistake that would seal her fate. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Marcus was going to ruin everything. He was going to divorce me, take the children, expose the money I'd borrowed from the accounts. I had no choice." The confession hung in the air like a death sentence. Detective Kim looked at Victoria with something that might have been pity. "Victoria Sterling, you're under arrest for the murder of your husband, Marcus Sterling." The Family Services office had been transformed into something resembling a living room, with soft chairs, toys scattered on low tables, and boxes of tissues strategically placed within reach. But nothing could make this conversation easier for two children who were about to learn that their mother had murdered their father. Lily Sterling sat curled in an oversized armchair, her favorite stuffed elephant clutched tightly against her chest. 11-year-old Noah had positioned himself protectively beside his sister, his young face already showing the kind of wariness that comes from having your world shattered too many times. Detective Kim sat across from them, flanked by a child psychologist and a victim's advocate. Through the one-way window, Helena Morrison watched from the next room, her face pale with worry for her grandchildren. "Kids," Detective Kim began gently, "we need to talk to you about some things we've discovered about the night your daddy died." Lily looked up with eyes that seemed far too old for a 9-year-old face. "Did you find out who really hurt Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart, we did." Noah's jaw tightened. "It wasn't Grandma Nana, was it? We told you she would never hurt Daddy." "No, it wasn't your grandmother, Mom. You were right about that." Kim paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes, when adults are in trouble or scared about something, they make very bad choices. Choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love and protect. You're talking about Mommy, aren't you?" Noah's voice was flat, emotionless. "She's the one who made Daddy sick." The adults in the room exchanged glances. They'd expected tears, denial, shock. They hadn't expected this quiet acceptance from a child who'd already figured out what the grown-ups were trying so hard to explain gently. "How did you know?" the psychologist asked softly. "Because Daddy was scared of her." Noah's composure cracked slightly. "At first, I thought he was just sick because of his heart. But then he started acting weird around Mommy. He wouldn't eat anything she cooked. He locked his bedroom door. He would only take his medicine when Grandma Nana was watching. Lily nodded against her elephant's soft fur. And Mommy wasn't sad when Daddy died. Not really sad. She was pretending sad, like when she pretends to like the pictures we draw for her. She was on the phone a lot, Noah added. Talking to Aunt Jennifer about moving to California. She said it would be better for us, but she never asked us if we wanted to move. Detective Kim felt her heart breaking for these children who'd had to grow up too fast, who'd learned to read the dangerous undercurrents in their own home just to survive. What's going to happen to us now? Lily whispered. Well, that's something we need to talk about. Your Mommy is going to have to go away for a long time because of what she did. But you're not alone. You have people who love you very much. Grandma Nana. Lily's face brightened for the first time. Your grandmother wants very much to take care of you, but we need to know how you feel about that. This is your choice, and no one will be angry with you no matter what you decide. Noah stood up and walked to the one-way window, pressing his small hand against the glass, as if he could feel Helena's presence on the other side. Grandma Nana loves us for real. Not pretend love like Mommy. She makes us pancakes with funny faces and lets us cry when we miss Daddy, and doesn't get mad when we make messes. She tells us stories about when Daddy was little, Lily added, sitting up straighter. And she knows all the words to Daddy's favorite songs. Mommy never sang Daddy's songs. So you want to live with your grandmother? Yes, both children said simultaneously, their voices strong and certain. Detective Kim smiled. Then that's what we'll arrange. Your grandmother is going to be released today, and you'll go home with her. What about Mommy? Lily asked in a small voice. The psychologist leaned forward. Your Mommy is sick, sweetheart. Not sick in her body, but sick in her heart and mind. She's going to get help, but she can't take care of you anymore because she made such bad choices. Noah returned to his sister's side and took her hand. That's okay. We have Grandma Nana. She's all the family we need. Yeah, through the window. Helena Morrison wiped tears from her eyes and pressed her own hand against the glass where Noah's had been. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that something good might come from this nightmare. Her grandchildren needed her. And maybe, just maybe, she could find redemption not through punishment for her past, but through love for her future. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and curious onlookers on the first day of what the media had dubbed the Sterling family murder trial. Helena Morrison walked between her court-appointed attorney, David Martinez, and Detective James Wright, who had taken personal leave to support the woman he'd never stopped loving. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Victoria Sterling sat at the defendant's table in an expensive navy suit, her blonde hair pulled back severely, her face a mask of composure that fooled no one who looked closely enough to see the desperation in her eyes. Across the aisle, Helena sat in the witness section, her hands folded calmly in her lap, no longer wearing orange but still carrying herself with the quiet dignity that had sustained her through weeks of wrongful imprisonment. The state calls Victoria Sterling to the stand, announced District Attorney Rebecca Hayes, a woman known for her methodical approach to complex cases. Victoria rose gracefully, every inch the successful attorney she'd once been. As she placed her hand on the Bible, her voice was steady and clear. I do solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom. Mrs. Sterling, Hayes began, please tell the court about your relationship with your late husband. Marcus and I were married for 12 years. We had 2 beautiful children together, Lily and Noah. We built a life, a family, a future. Victoria's voice carried just the right note of grief and loss. I loved my husband deeply, and yet you've been charged with his murder. How do you explain that Victoria's carefully constructed facade flickered for just a moment. "I believe there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Yes, Marcus and I had our difficulties. What married couple doesn't? But I would never have hurt him. He was the father of my children, my partner in life." Hayes walked to the evidence table and picked up a series of bank statements. "Mrs. Sterling, can you explain these withdrawals from your husband's business accounts, nearly $200,000 over 18 months, transferred to accounts in your name?" "Those were legitimate business expenses. Marcus knew about every transaction." "Did he know about your relationship with Thomas Bradford?" The color drained from Victoria's face. Around the courtroom, people leaned forward in their seats. "I don't know what you're talking about." Hayes nodded to her assistant, who activated a large screen. Security camera footage began playing, showing Victoria entering an upscale hotel with a man who was decidedly not her husband. The timestamp showed a date just 6 weeks before Marcus's death. "This was taken at the Grandview Hotel. The man with you is Thomas Bradford, a commercial real estate developer. Hotel records show you rented a room together on 14 separate occasions over the past year." Victoria's hands clenched in her lap. That was... Marcus and I were having problems. Thomas was a friend who helped me through a difficult time. A friend who you discussed relocating to California with after your husband's death. That's not... We have phone records. Mrs. Sterling... Hours of recorded conversations with Mr. Bradford about your plans for after Marcus died. Plans that included liquidating his assets and starting a new life together. Victoria's attorney, a nervous man named Gerald Fletcher, stood up. "Objection, Your Honor." "Relevance." "Goes to motive, Your Honor," Hayes replied smoothly. "The defendant had both financial and romantic reasons to want her husband dead." "Overruled. Continue. Ms. Hayes." Hayes returned to the evidence table and lifted a small evidence bag containing white powder residue. "Mrs. Sterling, can you identify this substance?" "I have no idea what that is." "This is digitalis, found in your garbage disposal after a search of your home. The same substance that killed your husband. Can you explain how concentrated digitalis came to be in your kitchen?" Victoria's composure finally cracked. "I don't know. Maybe Helena put it there. She had access to the house. She could have planted evidence to frame me." "Helena Morrison was in jail when this evidence was discovered. Mrs. Sterling. She couldn't have planted anything." Hayes's voice was ice cold. "But you were home. You were there when our officers arrived with a search warrant. You were there when this evidence was still fresh in your disposal system." "I want to speak to my attorney," Victoria whispered. "Too late for that. Mrs. Sterling, you've already given us what we need." Hayes turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear evidence that Victoria Sterling systematically poisoned her husband over a period of months while embezzling money from his business and conducting an extramarital affair. You'll hear how she framed an innocent woman, a loving grandmother, who had devoted 5 years of her life to caring for this family." Victoria's attorney requested a recess, but the damage was already done. In the gallery, Helena Morrison watched the woman who had destroyed her family finally being held accountable for her crimes. James Wright, sitting beside Helena, reached over and squeezed her hand gently. "It's almost over," he whispered. Helena nodded, but her eyes were sad rather than triumphant. "No one wins when a family is destroyed like this. James, those children will carry these scars forever." As the judge called for a 30-minute recess, Victoria Sterling slumped in her chair, finally understanding that her carefully constructed lies were crumbling around her. The perfect life she'd tried to steal was slipping away, and there was nothing left but the truth she'd spent months trying to bury. In the hallway outside the courtroom, reporters shouted questions that no one answered, but the story was already writing itself. A woman's greed had destroyed everything she'd touched, and justice was finally catching up with her. The courtroom was packed for the final day of testimony. Victoria Sterling's defense had crumbled over the past week as witness after witness had testified to her guilt. The embezzlement evidence was overwhelming. The affair was documented beyond denial. The digitalis in her garbage disposal spoke for itself. But District Attorney Hayes had saved the most devastating testimony for last. The state calls Helena Morrison to the stand. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as Helena rose from her seat. She'd been cleared of all charges days ago, but her testimony would be crucial in establishing the timeline of Marcus's death and Victoria's deception. Helena walked to the witness stand with the same quiet dignity she'd maintained throughout her ordeal. As she placed her hand on the Bible, her voice was clear and strong. "I do solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God." "Mrs. Morrison," Hayes began, "please tell the court about your relationship with your son, Marcus Sterling. Marcus was everything to me, my only child, my pride and joy. When his father died 15 years ago, Marcus stepped up to take care of me. When he married Victoria and had children, he insisted I move in with them so I could help with the family and so we could all be together. Did you have any reason to want Marcus dead? None whatsoever. Marcus was my heart, my reason for living. I would have given my life for his without hesitation." Hayes nodded. "Mrs. Morrison, I need to ask you about the night Marcus died. Can you walk us through what happened?" Helena took a deep breath. Victoria and Marcus had been arguing more frequently in the weeks before his death. That night, they had a particularly bad fight about money and about Victoria's behavior. Marcus was upset, more upset than I'd ever seen him. "What happened after the argument?" "Marcus came to the kitchen where I was cleaning up. He was shaking, terrified. He told me he believed Victoria was trying to poison him slowly, and he was afraid she might try something more drastic that night." Victoria's attorney started to object, but Helena continued. "He showed me a small vial of concentrated digitalis that he'd found hidden in Victoria's jewelry box. He said he'd been feeling sicker and sicker, and when he found that vial, he knew what was happening to him." The courtroom erupted in whispers. This was new information, not mentioned in any previous testimony. "What did Marcus ask you to do, Mrs. Morrison?" Helena's voice grew quieter, but everyone in the courtroom strained to hear her words. "He said the digitalis poisoning had already damaged his heart beyond repair. Dr. Chen had told him privately that he had weeks, maybe days, before his heart would fail completely. The poison had done too much damage." Hayes felt her heart rate quicken. "What exactly did Marcus ask you to do?" "He asked me to help him die peacefully, before Victoria could finish what she'd started. He said he couldn't bear the thought of dying slowly, in agony, knowing that his wife was torturing him." Helena's voice broke slightly. "He said he'd rather die with dignity, surrounded by love, than let Victoria have the satisfaction of watching him suffer." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. "Mrs. Morrison, are you telling this court that you did, in fact, cause your son's death?" Helena looked directly at the jury. "I gave my son a final concentrated dose of digitalis that night, not to murder him, but to grant him the peaceful death he begged me for. Victoria had already poisoned him beyond hope of recovery. I helped him find peace before the pain became unbearable." Victoria Sterling shot to her feet. "That's impossible! She's lying to protect herself." Judge Patterson banged his gavel. "Mrs. Sterling, sit down." But Helena wasn't finished. Marcus recorded a video message on his phone that night. He wanted everyone to know that Victoria was responsible for his poisoning, and that what I did was an act of mercy, not murder. Hayes's hands shook as she accepted the phone from Helena. Your Honor, I'd like to present this evidence to the court. Marcus Sterling's face appeared on the courtroom screen, pale and drawn, but determined. His voice was weak but clear. If you're watching this, I'm already gone. My wife, Victoria Sterling, has been poisoning me with digitalis for months. She's stolen money from our accounts. She's having an affair, and she's planning to kill me and frame my mother. I'm asking my mother to help me die with dignity rather than let Victoria torture me any longer. My mother is not a murderer. She's an angel of mercy. Victoria is the killer in this family. The courtroom exploded into chaos as Victoria Sterling collapsed in her chair. Finally understanding that even in death, Marcus had outmaneuvered her completely. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. When they returned to the courtroom, their faces told the story before the foreman ever spoke a word. In the case of the State versus Victoria Sterling, on the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Victoria Sterling showed no emotion as the verdict was read. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. Her attorney placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, but she didn't seem to notice. On the charge of embezzlement in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of fraud in the second degree, we find the defendant guilty. Judge Patterson's voice was solemn as he addressed the defendant. Mrs. Sterling, you have been found guilty of the premeditated murder of your husband, as well as multiple financial crimes. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years. In the gallery, Helena Morrison watched without satisfaction as Victoria was led away in handcuffs. There was no joy in this moment, only the hollow sadness that comes when justice is served. But families remain broken forever. But Helena's legal troubles weren't over. 3 days later, she found herself back in a courtroom, this time facing charges related to her mercy killing of Marcus. The charges were different assisted suicide, practicing medicine without a license, and wrongful death, but the stakes were still significant. District Attorney Hayes, who had prosecuted Victoria so vigorously, now found herself in the unusual position of recommending leniency for Helena. Your Honor, Hayes addressed Judge Williams in the smaller courtroom. While Mrs. Morrison technically broke the law by administering a fatal dose of medication to her son, the circumstances of this case are extraordinary. Marcus Sterling was already dying from the poison his wife had administered. Medical experts have testified that he would have died within days regardless, and that his death would have been prolonged and agonizing. Helena's new attorney, a public defender named Maria Santos, stood to address the court. Your Honor, Mrs. Morrison acted not out of malice or personal gain, but out of compassion for a beloved son who was facing inevitable death. She has served our community faithfully for 40 years as a nurse, caring for the sick and dying with extraordinary dedication. Judge Williams, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and silver hair, looked directly at Helena. Mrs. Morrison, do you understand that what you did, regardless of your intentions, was against the law? Yes, Your Honor, I understand completely. And do you feel remorse for your actions? Helena was quiet for a long moment. I feel grief. Your Honor, grief for my son, grief for my grandchildren who lost both parents, grief for the choices that led us all to this moment. But I cannot feel remorse for granting my dying son's final wish for peace. Judge Williams nodded slowly. Mrs. Morrison, this court sentences you to 5 years probation and 500 hours of community service to be served at the county hospice facility. You will be monitored closely, but you will remain free to care for your grandchildren. The relief in the courtroom was palpable. Helena's legs nearly gave out as the reality sank in she would go home to Lily and Noah today. As they left the courthouse, James Wright took Helena's arm to steady her. "It's over," he said quietly. "It's finally over." Helena looked back at the imposing building where two very different kinds of justice had been served. "No, James, it's not over. It's just beginning. I have 2 children to raise, 2 lives to help heal from all this trauma." "You won't be doing it alone," James said, his voice carrying a promise that had been 50 years in the making. Helena smiled for the first time in months. "I know, and that makes all the difference." The family court building felt different from the criminal courthouse where Victoria had been convicted. Softer lighting, pastel walls, and child-friendly furniture couldn't disguise the fact that Lily and Noah Sterling's future hung in the balance. But the atmosphere was designed to remind everyone that children's welfare, not punishment, was the priority. Helena Morrison sat beside her family law attorney, Patricia Reynolds, watching as Robert Sterling's legal team arranged their files at the opposing table. At 70, Marcus's father commanded respect in any room he entered, and his 3-piece suit and silver hair made him look every inch the successful businessman who could provide material advantages Helena never could. "Remember," Patricia whispered, "this isn't about who has more money. It's about what's best for the children." But Helena knew that Robert's attorney would argue exactly that his wealth, his stable home, his ability to provide private schools and college funds made him the logical choice for custody. She also knew that Robert genuinely loved his grandchildren and believed he was fighting for their best interests. Judge Margaret Foster, a woman in her 50s known for her thoughtful approach to family cases, called the hearing to order. "We're here today to determine permanent custody arrangements for Lily Sterling, age 9, and Noah Sterling, age 11. Both children have been temporarily placed with their paternal grandmother, Helena Morrison, following their mother's conviction and incarceration." Robert's attorney, William Hayes, no relation to the prosecutor, stood first. "Your Honor, Mr. Robert Sterling is a loving grandfather who can provide these children with every advantage in life. He has a 7-bedroom home in the best school district, financial resources to ensure their education through graduate school, and the stability that comes from a lifetime of success in business and community leadership." He gestured toward Robert, who sat straight-backed and dignified. "Mr. Sterling has already established trust funds for both children. He can provide them with opportunities their grandmother, despite her good intentions, simply cannot match." Helena felt the familiar weight of inadequacy settling on her shoulders. Her modest 3-bedroom rental house, her limited income from Social Security and Marcus's inheritance. Her age, all of it seemed suddenly inadequate when compared to Robert's resources. But then Patricia Reynolds stood, and her voice carried a quiet strength that filled the courtroom. "Your Honor, custody decisions should be based on love, not luxury. These children have already suffered tremendous trauma. They've lost their father to murder and their mother to prison. What they need now isn't bigger bedrooms or better schools. They need emotional healing, stability, and unconditional love." She opened a folder and withdrew several documents. "I'd like to present the court with statements from Lily and Noah's teachers, their counselors, and their pediatrician, all documenting the remarkable progress these children have made in the 6 months they've lived with Mrs. Morrison." Judge Foster reviewed the documents carefully. "According to these reports, both children have improved dramatically in school. Their anxiety levels have decreased significantly, and they've shown remarkable resilience in processing their trauma. Their counselor specifically notes that they feel safe and loved in their current environment. Furthermore, Your Honor," Patricia continued, "both children have expressed a clear preference to remain with their grandmother. Noah, at 11, is old enough for his wishes to carry significant weight in this decision." Judge Foster nodded. "I'd like to speak with the children privately. Can they be brought in?" 10 minutes later, Lily and Noah entered the judge's chambers, holding hands and looking nervous but determined. Helena watched through the glass partition as Judge Foster knelt to their level. speaking with them in quiet tones that didn't carry through the soundproof glass. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. When the children emerged, both were smiling, and Noah gave Helena a thumbs up that made her heart soar. Back in the courtroom, Judge Foster's expression was thoughtful as she prepared to deliver her decision. This court has considered all the evidence, including the children's own expressed preferences, their current stability and progress, and the recommendations of their care providers, while Mr. Sterling's resources are impressive and his love for his grandchildren is evident. The paramount concern of this court is the children's emotional well-being. She looked directly at Helena. Mrs. Morrison, despite the challenges you've faced this year, you have provided these children with exactly what they needed most to safe harbor in the storm. Your home may be modest, but it's filled with the kind of love that helps children heal from trauma. Helena felt tears streaming down her face as the judge continued. This court awards permanent custody of Lily and Noah Sterling to their paternal grandmother, Helena Morrison. Mr. Sterling will be granted generous visitation rights, and I strongly encourage both parties to work together in the children's best interests. Robert Sterling stood and walked directly to Helena. For a moment, she thought he might challenge the decision, but instead, he took her hands in his. "Take good care of them," he said quietly. "They're all we have left of Marcus." "They'll always know how much you love them," Helena promised. "And they'll always have a grandfather who wants to be part of their lives." As they left the courthouse, Lily skipped ahead while Noah walked beside Helena, his hand in hers. "Grandma Nana," he said seriously, "Judge Foster asked us what we wanted most in the whole world." "What did you tell her?" "I told her we wanted to stay with the person who loves us exactly the way we are, even when we're sad or scared or angry." He squeezed her hand. "I told her we wanted to stay with you." Helena stopped walking and knelt down to hug both children tightly. "You're stuck with me forever now," she whispered into their hair. "Good," Lily said firmly. "That's exactly how long we want to keep you." 6 months after the custody hearing, Helena Morrison stood in her kitchen making Sunday morning pancakes while Lily and Noah argued good-naturedly about whether chocolate chips or blueberries made them taste better. The ordinary domesticity of the moment struck her as miraculous after everything they'd been through. They were just a family having breakfast together. The doorbell rang as Helena was flipping the last pancake. Through the window, she could see James Wright standing on her porch, holding a newspaper and wearing the slightly nervous expression he got when he was working up the courage to say something important. "Uncle James," Lily called out, using the honorary title she'd given him months ago. Grandma Nana made funny-face pancakes. James had been a steady presence in their lives since the trial ended, helping with homework, attending school plays, and gradually becoming part of their small family unit. His relationship with Helena had evolved slowly, carefully, built on 50 years of history and tempered by the wisdom that comes with age. "Good morning, troublemakers," he said, ruffling Noah's hair. "Helena, could I talk to you privately for a minute?" They stepped onto the back porch, where Helena's small garden was showing the first signs of spring. She'd planted it as therapy, she told herself. But really it was hope, a belief that they would be in this house long enough to see things grow. "There's something in the paper this morning," James said, handing her the local section. "About Victoria." Helena's heart clenched as she read the headline, "Convicted Murderer Attempts Suicide in Prison." The article was brief but devastating. Victoria Sterling had been found unconscious in her cell, having overdosed on prescription medication she'd somehow acquired. She was in critical condition at the prison hospital. "The children don't need to know about this," Helena said immediately. "Helena, they're going to find out eventually. Kids at school, neighbors talking, then I'll tell them myself when I figure out how to explain that their mother tried to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. They stood in silence for a moment, watching a cardinal build its nest in the oak tree that shaded Helena's garden. "There's something else," James said gently. "Victoria asked the prison chaplain to contact you. She wants to see you." Helena's first instinct was immediate refusal. Victoria had destroyed so much, caused so much pain. The thought of sitting across from her, of looking into the eyes of the woman who'd murdered Marcus and tried to frame her for it, made Helena's stomach turn. But then she thought about Lily's questions over the past months. Questions about forgiveness, about whether people could change, about whether it was possible to love someone who'd done terrible things. "What would you tell the children to do?" she asked James. "I tell them that forgiveness isn't about the other person deserving it. It's about not letting anger poison your own heart." Helena nodded slowly. "Then I suppose I know what I have to do." 2 weeks later, Helena sat in the prison visiting room, waiting for Victoria to be brought in. When the door opened and Victoria appeared in her orange jumpsuit, Helena was shocked by how much she'd changed. The perfectly groomed woman who'd orchestrated Marcus's murder was gone, replaced by someone who looked broken and hollow. Victoria sat down across from Helena without meeting her eyes. "I didn't think you'd come," Victoria said quietly. "I didn't think I would either." They sat in silence for several minutes before Victoria finally looked up. "I keep dreaming about Marcus, about the night he died, about the look in his eyes when he realized what I'd been doing to him." Helena's hands clenched in her lap, but her voice remained steady. "Why, Victoria, why did you do it?" "Because I was drowning." Victoria's voice cracked. "The debts, the pressure to maintain the perfect life, the fear that everyone would find out I wasn't as successful as I pretended to be. And then Thomas came along, and he made me feel like I could start over, be someone different." "So you decided to murder your husband." "I told myself it would be quick, painless, that Marcus would just go to sleep and not wake up." Victoria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I didn't know he was aware of what was happening. I didn't know he was suffering." Helena thought about Marcus's final video, about the fear in his eyes, about the way he'd begged her for peace. "Your children ask about you," Helena said finally. Victoria's composure crumbled completely. "How are they? Are they okay?" "They're healing, slowly, but they still love you, Victoria. Somewhere underneath all the hurt and confusion, they still love their mother." "I don't deserve their love." "No," Helena agreed. "You don't. But children love their parents anyway, even when those parents fail them catastrophically." Victoria looked directly at Helena for the first time. "Will you tell them? Will you tell them I'm sorry? Not just for what I did to Marcus, but for what I did to you, for trying to destroy their family." Helena studied Victoria's face, looking for signs of manipulation, for the calculating woman who'd orchestrated such elaborate lies. Instead, she saw someone who'd lost everything and was finally, perhaps for the first time in her life, telling the complete truth. "I'll tell them," Helena said, "and someday, when they're older and stronger, maybe they'll be ready to hear it from you." As Helena prepared to leave, Victoria called after her, "Helena, thank you for taking care of them, for being the mother I couldn't be." Helena paused at the door. "I'm not doing it for you, Victoria. I'm doing it for them. And for Marcus." Walking out of the prison into the afternoon sunshine, Helena felt something shift inside her chest, not forgiveness that would take time, but the beginning of peace. 1 year later, Helena Morrison stood in Greenwood Cemetery, watching her grandchildren place fresh flowers on their father's grave. It was Marcus's birthday. He would have been 43, and they'd started a tradition of celebrating his life rather than mourning his death. Lily knelt beside the headstone, carefully arranging the daisies she'd picked from Helena's garden. "Happy birthday, Daddy," she whispered. "I got an A on my science project about butterflies. I remembered what you taught me about metamorphosis." Noah stood more formally, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that reminded Helena achingly of Marcus at that age. Dad, I made the baseball team. Coach says I have your swing. Grandpa Robert is going to teach me to slide into home plate without getting grass stains all over my uniform. Helena smiled at the mention of Robert, who'd become a cherished part of their extended family. True to his word, he'd maintained regular contact with the children, taking them to baseball games and museums, helping with school projects, and providing the kind of grandfather love that enriched their lives without competing with Helena's primary role. "Grandma Nana," Lily said, tugging on Helena's sleeve, "will you tell Daddy about James?" Helena's cheeks warmed slightly. 3 months ago, James Wright had asked her to marry him, not with the desperate passion of their youth, but with the quiet certainty of two people who'd found their way back to each other after decades of living separate lives. The wedding would be small, just family and close friends, but it represented something Helena had never expected to have again, a future filled with love and possibility. "Your father always wanted me to be happy," Helena said, kneeling beside the grave. "Marcus, I want you to know that James makes me laugh every day. He fixes the things I break. He listens to my stories even when I repeat them, and he loves your children like they were his own grandchildren." She pulled a letter from her purse, one she'd written the night before. "I also want you to know that Lily and Noah are thriving. They're still sad sometimes, still angry about what happened, but they're healing. They talk about you every day. They remember your jokes, your songs, your bedtime stories. They know how much you love them." The letter contained updates about school, about friends, about the small victories and everyday joys that Marcus would have celebrated. But it also contained Helena's promise that she would raise his children with the same love and wisdom he would have provided, that she would keep his memory alive in their hearts, and that she would never let them forget they were cherished beyond measure. As they prepared to leave, Noah turned back to the grave one more time. "Dad, there's something else. Mom wrote us a letter from prison. Grandma Nana helped us understand what it meant." Victoria's letter had arrived 3 weeks ago, written in careful handwriting that spoke of remorse and therapy, and the slow, difficult work of trying to understand how she'd become capable of such terrible choices. It wasn't an attempt to excuse her actions or seek forgiveness she didn't deserve. It was simply a mother's acknowledgement that she'd failed her children catastrophically, and her hope that someday they might find peace with the complicated truth of loving someone who'd done unforgivable things. "We decided we want to write back to her," Lily added. "Not because we forgive her, but because Grandma Nana says forgiveness is something that happens in our hearts, not something we give to other people." Helena felt tears prick her eyes at the wisdom these children had developed, the emotional intelligence they'd gained through surviving something no child should have to endure. As they walked back to the car, Helena reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, she'd been sleeping in her car, convinced she was unwanted and useless. Today, she was the center of a small but loving family, preparing to marry a good man, and raising 2 remarkable children who taught her that love really could triumph over tragedy. Marcus had saved them all, not just with his careful planning and legal protections, but with the love he'd instilled in his children and the example he'd set of putting family above everything else. "Grandma Nana," Noah said as they reached the car, "do you think Dad knows about all the good things that happened after he died?" Helena looked back at the grave, where the afternoon sun was creating long shadows across the grass. "I think your father knows that love doesn't end when someone dies, and I think he's proud of the family we've become. Even though it's not the family he planned, especially because it's not the family he planned," Helena said, opening the car door. "Sometimes the most beautiful things come from the most broken pieces." As they drove home, past the houses where other families were living their own complicated stories of love and loss, Helena Morrison allowed herself to believe something she'd never expected to feel again, that the future, whatever it held, would be filled with more joy than sorrow, more love than fear, and more hope than she'd ever dared imagine possible. The last laugh, it turned out, belonged to love itself. The end. Thanks for watching.